I want to thank you for joining me on Dream Chasers Radio. I am your host, Yaya Diamond, and I'm having a great time. Hey, what's up, people? How you doing? Okay, look, we got a cool dad. I'm sorry, we just got a cool dad. I love cool dads. I mean, I'm just saying, Mr. Pat Richards is a cool dad. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you. So let's go back a little bit. So you love your kids, your girls.
I do. I love both of my kids. It's I'm fortunate. I've got a 16-year-old son and a soon-to-be 15-year-old daughter, and they are the center of my world.
Wow, wow. It's such a pleasure to raise great children, But now you kind of take it a little bit step further. So what made you write? I mean, okay, so I'm just gonna have to read the title. I don't want to get it wrong now. Okay, so it says Dad in the Cheer Bow. Okay, I need to know.
So it's a funny story. It's one of those things. My daughter, when she was young, like a lot of little girls, decided she wanted to try cheerleading. And she was doing it for about 2 years. She was enjoying it, but she was unsure if she wanted to continue doing it. And I didn't realize it at the time. She was at an event, a school event. She ran into her coach at the time, who was asking her if she was going to come back for a third season. And she decided that, yes, she would come back and cheer again on her competition team, but only if I could become a coach. She wanted her dad there.
Oh,
And it was one of those things that, I am so grateful to her head coach for even entertaining the idea. It's something when you've got a precocious 8-year-old who's all of a sudden trying to decide how things are going to be run. And it was one of those that I had never had anything to do with cheer. I mean, I obviously knew cheerleaders in high school, had seen the movie Bring It On, but that was the extent of my knowledge. And I had told the coach at the time. I got an email from her just welcoming me to the squad, and I told her, I said, "Yeah, I appreciate you, and appreciate you being so gracious. You don't have to really use me. I can carry things and bring the mats in. That's sort of the end of it." But instead, she threw me in full force, and I experienced everything there was to experience.
what was that like? I mean, it wasn't just your daughter, obviously. It was a bunch of girls. I mean, come on. Come on, tell me.
It was. I was a coach for 4 years.
Wow.
And the way that I tell it is that I was incredibly lucky to have 19 cheer daughters. And I spent more time in the season with my 19 girls than I would with my own wife. It was that sort of thing. And it was just an incredible experience. But it was also one of those that, and it's going to sound funny. I mean, you sort of look at it, you look at who I am and those sorts of things. And it was a tough experience to originally get used to. I mean, I truly felt out of place. I felt like I didn't belong. And even at competitions would be told. I remember there was one of our early competitions. I had a cheerleader who I was very close to, loved her like a doll, loved her like a daughter. And she had overheard at one of the competitions some mom chattering about how men don't belong in cheer. And my athlete, she asked if she could go over and set her straight, and I said, "No, that's okay. We're good. Don't worry about it." But it was really those sorts of experiences.
Wow. I mean, but men do belong in cheer. I've seen cheer teams before where the guys are in, and I've seen guy cheerleaders.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's
Huh.
one of those. And I think very early on, I realized that one of the values of having me there is I help show my girls that you can do whatever you want. Nobody's going to
Mhm.
tell you what you can and can't do. I mean, if you're willing to put in the work, then you can go ahead and do it. And we were fortunate. Our town in New Jersey, I think if I understand correctly, we were the only town in the country that had a Pop Warner League where you had a boy cheer coach and a woman who was coaching football.
Oh,
And that's
wow.
what they need to see.
Yeah, definitely. It's all about technique and talent and understanding the game. It's got nothing to do with playing the game. It's teaching how to play the game.
That is
Anyone can
absolutely,
teach something that they know.
yeah, you're absolutely correct. And it's one of those things. And as I said, I entered it not knowing. So it's a matter of having to learn what I'm going to teach.
Mhm.
And, threw myself in and, took the courses, went to went to the events and the professional development workshops, got certified as a cheer coach. But I recognized I was never going to be able to, talk from experience. And so for me, one of the greatest roles I could play was really to be a cheerleader for my cheerleaders, to be the one that was constantly encouraging them, constantly being positive, learning very quickly that, simply giving them an atta-girl was never going to do it. You had to be very specific about what you were singling out. What were they doing right? They needed to know. And that just became part of my DNA. I mean, I really threw myself into it and just would do absolutely anything for them.
Wow. How has this experience changed your future?
I think it's going to sound silly. It's one of those things. I think it made me a better person. I mean, I look at, professionally, I was always one of those that, with the work that I did, I was the one who was brought in theory, to be the smartest person in the room. I was supposed to have all the answers. I was the one who did all the talking. And very early on, I recognized that I needed to spend my time listening. I needed to spend my time understanding. And that, I think, has helped me enormously. I think it's helped me in understanding the importance of positivity and really recognizing that if you work hard, if you're committed to something, whether you win the trophy or not, you can be enormously successful. But it also, it's one of those that I can't overstate how wonderful it was in terms of strengthening my relationship with my daughter. It was a strong relationship to begin with. If it wasn't, she wouldn't have asked for me to be her coach.
Definitely.
But it was one of those that we became thick as thieves, and the same with her friends. I mean, we would have I had a constant stream of cheerleaders that seemed to go in and out of my house. I would have girls that would just show up at my doorstep with a sleeping bag and a backpack, ready to spend the night, and their mother was already gone.
Oh my gosh!
Left them on the stoop. But it was such a great experience. I mean, with those ages, I mean, looking at my daughter, this was essentially from when she was 8 to about 13. Those are such important years, and I was there.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. She and her friends, I think, felt like they could talk to me about just about anything. And I would get, phone calls and FaceTimes from my athletes in the middle of the day because they had an issue and they needed to talk to somebody. You can't force that. I felt like I earned it, and it was so important. I think just for me personally, and also for me and my daughter.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. What would you do if you didn't have that experience? I mean, if she didn't ask you, do you think your life would be kind of the same as it was before? Or do you think the change would inevitably come?
I think, I don't think the change would have come. It was one of those things that, when you look at the time that had to go into it, you look at the amount of hours we would spend each week in practice. I was one of those individuals that before I was doing this, I was on the road all the time for work. I thought I was a good dad, but I was away more than I was home. And so it was one of those things that once I started getting into coaching, I had to work my schedule around the cheer schedule. I had to make sure that I was there on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays for practice, that I was present and available. And I think it really helped me begin to put some things in priority, really recognizing that, in many ways, I used to define myself by my work. And I can say over the last 5 or 6 years, I far more defined myself based on being a coach. It was something that I was incredibly proud of, no matter how ridiculous that I was over the course of my career. It was something that defined me.
Wow. And changed your life enough to write a book about it. Tell me about that.
Sure. Well, it's one of those funny things that, you go through, you experience things in life, and you pick up these stories. And I would share these stories because you've run into people, even in professional settings, family, friends, when all of a sudden they would hear that I was a cheer coach, and I look like I should be working on a football sideline, not a cheer mat. And they would want to hear stories. And I would start telling stories. And it was one of those things that you keep running into people say, you should write a book. This is such an experience. You should write a book. And I thought, I've done that before. Both of my children are adopted from Guatemala. I've written a book about that experience. And so I was like, I don't know if I want to do another book. And it was one of those things, right, as COVID was hitting, and I had some time. And I said, okay, I'm going to write the first section of the book. And then I'm going to share it with my wife. And I'm going to see, because she experienced this from a completely different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I figured I'll share it with her, and she can tell me, be honest with me as to whether it's worth continuing or not.
Gotcha.
And so that's what we did.
Wow. Well, you're a cool coach, dad coach. What is your relationship now while they're older and things have gone on? Do they even look back at that time and say, Dad, you were really cool?
But my daughter, I'm still close with my fellow coaches. I'm still close with a lot of the girls that I was fortunate enough to work with. One of them, last summer went to her quinceañera, for instance, those sorts of
Oh,
things. My daughter is still, she's incredibly mindful of the experience, I think, and what it meant. She's not thrilled with seeing her picture on a cover of a book.
that's you and her for real?
That's me and her. But it's one of those that she's a cheerleader in high school, so she's doing both JV cheer plus she's doing competition cheer. And even this week, she will talk about the fact that what they're doing is different than the way we used to coach it. And she had that, when I was coaching her, she was also doing competition, all-star cheer in the off seasons. And she would always, compare sort of, my style versus those coaches back then who used to yell a lot. That if you scared the girls, they would eventually do what you were looking for.
Yeah, I've had to go through that. Yeah. You weren't like that though, were you?
I wasn't. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was one of those things that, again, I think, being mindful, for 4 years, I was the only guy there. I was the only guy in the room. I was the only guy on the mat. And, I had to be mindful of that, coming in and trying to be the big boss man and trying to yell and scream to get my way wasn't going to do it. It really required me to paying a lot of attention to seeing the details, being able to praise them when specific things were done right, but being able to talk if something wasn't working well, often pulling them to the side and beginning to explain, this is what we need to try. This is where it's breaking down, those sorts of things. I can tell you, it's the one thing though that it still haunts me. When I was going through all the initial trainings to become a coach, one of the things that they recommended was, what you do is, and to be an effective coach, because you don't want to yell at everybody. So single out your own child and let them know beforehand that you're going to make an example of them. That way the other athletes are going to pay attention. And I didn't give it much thought for about 2 months. And then it was right before a competition. And something just wasn't working. And, this was my first year coaching. And I decided I'm going to follow the guidance of those who are training me. They must know best. And it was the only time in 4 years I yelled at my daughter while she was on the mat. And all of a sudden she just burst into tears.
Oh,
And I felt so horrible. And I had, another coach came over and said, it wasn't her fault. I said, yeah, I know that, but, and that, but it still haunts me. And I remember it was even worse because after that practice, I had to go into New York City for the night because I had a work event first thing in the morning. And I remember texting my daughter after practice, just, trying to apologize as much as I could. I will tell you, I recommend it to every coach after that, no matter what they suggest in terms of using your child as an example, absolutely horrible idea.
yeah, I wouldn't do that. No, definitely not. I mean, it's not gonna go. I was gonna ask you because you were the only guy among so many different young ladies and women. How did that help you to understand women and young ladies as they develop?
I think it was enormously powerful, enormously useful. I look at the other coaches as sisters. I mean, we are so incredibly close, and could talk about just about anything. in a way that I never could have imagined. But in many ways, it was the same for the athletes that I worked with. I became very close to them. I mean, I would have done anything for them during the season or even today.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, I think it helped obviously in my relationship with my own daughter, but
Yeah.
really being there to listen and recognizing that there was no topic that needed to be off limits. You learn to adapt in what you're doing. And I was one of those coaches that I felt like I was always prepared. So if you looked at my cheer bag, I always had hair ties, I always had candy, I always had the things that my athletes were going to need. And
Yeah.
then as time progressed, I also always had feminine hygiene products in my bag, just in case they were going to need those too. It's one of those things you can't be afraid to deal with that. If you have kids, that's the stuff you do. And these were all
Yeah.
my kids.
That's definitely. If you're married with them, if you have a wife, that's what you're going to deal with.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Do you feel like as if going into, okay, so before you went into this, you had one clear understanding of women and young ladies, and now coming out of it, it's a totally different understanding of women and ladies and young
Very,
ladies.
very much so. Very much so. And it's funny. I mean, you sort of think of, particularly, I mean, women in athletics, you would think sort of the open-mindedness, the acceptance that would come with it. And as I said, I would go to competitions and, I would hear things from parents. I could see even at the beginning with our own parents, I could see fathers and even some mothers sort of looking skeptically, wondering, what is this dude doing with my daughter? And,
Mm-hmm.
and remember, at one point, you always have friends who are lawyers. And I remember one of my friends telling me, whatever you do, you can't touch any of the teammates. I said, okay. And I'm sitting there at one of my first practices and we're stunting, and all of a sudden one of the girls falls. And of course, I instinctively grab her and I catch her before she hits the ground. And I remember going to the mother afterward. I said, look, I said, we got to make a decision here. I said, do you want me, if I need to grab your daughter if she's falling, or do you want me just to let her fall? And the mom just sort of looked at me like, what are you talking about? Of course you're going to prevent her from falling. But it's those things. But I mean, as I said, you get into competitions. I had one coach from a rival team come up to me at regionals and say at one point that there was once a father who wanted to be involved in their program, and they told him no. And I just sort of looked at it. I said, how sad for you.
Yeah.
And it was one of those,
You missed
I
out.
recognize, yeah, and I recognize, I mean, I stand out like a sore thumb at those cheer competitions. I mean, the shaved head, I'm a big dude, all of that. And I ended up owning it. And so I would go to cheer competitions, and I had, actually I have it here next to my desk. I had a fedora with my cheer bow in it.
Oh my gosh.
I was always wearing a cheer bow with my girls. I would wear a black and orange feather boa around my neck.
I saw that.
I had, when we went to nationals, when we competed at nationals, I had a black jacket with sequins.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to own being a cheer coach.
Wow.
And, it was one of those funny things, at first, people aren't quite sure what to make of it. When we, our last season before COVID, when we were competing at nationals down at Disney, literally would have other teams stop me because they wanted to take a picture, because this was not something that they were used to seeing.
Exactly. Wow. Wow. This is so cool. So you have that book. Are there any more books coming from your experiences?
As I said, I wrote years ago, I wrote a book about adopting my two kids from Guatemala, and it's called Dadprovement, and it really focuses on my needed evolution from being sort of a career focused guy to really wanting to be a better father and a better husband. And then we've got Dad in a Cheer Bow. Whether there's another book or not, I'm not sure. I think it's one of those things, and I've been stuck when I look at things professionally and I look at my own experiences as a coach. The thing that keeps coming back to me is this notion of how much we can learn from failure. That it's not the successes that teach us, but it's the failures. And I can look particularly when I was coaching, it was our second season, and the goal is always to get to nationals at Disney, and we fell just short of getting to nationals. But because of one of our performances at Central Jersey, we had earned an invitation to compete at Globals, which is a brand new thing that was just starting. And as coaches, we never gave it a sec. We never gave it any thought. The focus is always you go to nationals, you go to Disney. That's what it is. It's all about getting your picture taken with Minnie Mouse at the cheer competition. And after the season was over, we had agreed that we took the girls out. We took them all out to a movie. This was right before Christmas. And our girls came to us and they said, look, we want to accept the invitation to Globals. We're like, really? You sure about that? And like, yeah, absolutely. And, it meant they were going to have to practice over Christmas holiday and New Year's and get ready. The competition was Martin Luther King weekend. And so we're making sure they're committed. We had a couple of girls whose mothers and fathers said, nope, we don't want them to do anymore. We're done. And so we had to figure out how to replace them and all that. And so we're getting ready and the girls are starting to look good again. And we were leaving for Atlantic. The competition was in Atlantic City. And so we were all going to drive down on a Friday. So our last practice was going to be the Tuesday of that week. And at that practice, before the practice even started, one of our strongest cheerleaders, love her to death, she ended up blowing out her knee on the tumble track. And so started practice and she's just screaming and crying in pain. And we're trying to get her from the gym to the car so she can go to the hospital. Nobody knows what we're going to do, what's going to happen here. The girls are completely distraught. And I remember I called the whole team together. I said, we've got to do today's practice. We've got to figure this out. We've got to figure out what we're going to do if she can't come back. And some of the girls were saying, well, we can't possibly compete without her. We're done. And I said, no, let's see what we can do. And so we moved around some things. And it was okay. And so then we decided that rather than just head down on a Friday, that Thursday, we needed to do one more practice to see if we could actually do this. We were a little better. We were still really shaky. But we went to Atlantic City because that was what we had promised. So we go down and the way cheer competitions work is before you hit the mat to do your 2.5 minutes, you get practice time behind the scenes. So you can work, you stretch, you work on your tumble, you get to do your routine one time. We went back to the practice area and we were the most disastrous squad you could ever imagine. It's amazing that we could walk in without falling down. Nothing was working right. So we actually cut the practice session short. We said, let's just go in the tunnel and let's see what happens. And our girls hit the mat. And it was the most incredible performance I had ever seen them do.
Wow. They
came together. They rallied together. They showed such love and such support for one another right before we got started. And, we ended up taking second place at Globals after not even getting to nationals. And it was just so incredible to see them come together and to see them persevere after suffering such an enormous setback, losing one of their compatriots just days before.
Yeah.
It was just incredible.
Knee injuries. Oh my gosh. I hate those things. No, they're crazy. Wow. That's just amazing. That's amazing. And I'm glad you were a part of it. So where can people get your book?
So you can find it on Amazon. You can find it at Barnes and Noble. Dad in a Cheerbo. It's a fun story, and it sort of chronicles year by year and walks through, what it was like that first year, what it was like when we went to Globals, what it was like when we went to nationals, and then what it was like when we were trying to deal with putting together a team during COVID and trying to give our girls just something that they could hold on to, some sense of normalcy during a year that was so abnormal.
Yeah.
And then, there's some reflections actually on some of the questions that you were asking, sort of, what did it teach me in terms of women in athletics? What did it teach me in terms of wanting to be a better man, in terms of being more respectful, listening more, really trying to be more engaging? I think, that's a problem so many of us have is, we go into conversations and we don't take the time to do active listening. We're not listening to what the person's saying to us. All we're doing is thinking about what we're going to say next. And, I will say the experience was, it helped me overcome some of that. I can't tell you when I used to drive girls to practices and competitions and all of that, how much I appreciated that my girls were completely unfiltered with me. There was nothing they held back, nothing they weren't willing to discuss, even if I was right there. And
Wonderful.
it becomes just fascinating for learning.
Wow, that is wonderful. Wow. Wow. Well, Dad in the Cheer Bowl can be found on Amazon.com. We're going to put that information in the description box below so it's easy for you guys to find it. And he looks so good. And his daughter, she's so cute. So I know she said that she's not very happy for being on the cover, but I think that cover wouldn't be Dad in the Cheer Bowl without it. So definitely. I want to thank you so much, Mr. Richard, for coming on the show and for being here and talking about your experience. I think every man should have a time with their daughters and with other women. It changed your life. You know, you can see the woman for who she really is, which is very vulnerable but very strong at the same time. I want to thank you so much. And I mean, that's just so much fun. You got to read the book, guys. You just got to read the book. Until next time, guys, don't forget to dare to be different. Bye. Mr. Richards, thank you so much again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.